Okay, I wanted to say a little something today about why I've chosen to review contemporary memoir instead of, let's say, contemporary fiction on this Book Rants channel. I guess the first question is why I choose to review and read contemporary literature in general. By contemporary, I mean books that have been written most likely within the last 20 years, very often books that have just come out, books that have been published by independent publishers, books about which there's no real critical consensus. I knew upon doing that I ran the risk of reading and reviewing mediocre books. And I made the decision that it would be less disappointing, more satisfying for me to read a mediocre memoir than it would be for me to read mediocre fiction. Okay? Why? Because if an author in a memoir is incapable of pulling off, developing what they consider to be a relevant, revelatory, important moment or scene in their lives, if they fail to pull that off, that says something about who they are and how realized they are as a human being, how realized they are as a writer able to confront these demons, to confront these mysterious elements of themselves. Okay? And that can teach me something. The failure of the memoirist often speaks to who the memoirist is in a very clear way for the reader. Now, I'm sure in fiction, okay, the failure of the fiction writer also speaks to who the fiction writer is. But because of the gauze of fiction, because there are more obstacles to get to the author, who is the author, is there biographical, autobiographical elements, all that is kind of a mystery and kind of adds to the best fiction. In fact, I might even say that the best fiction is more satisfying than the best memoirs. However, I maintain that mediocre memoir is better than mediocre fiction because of what the reader can get out of it, okay? Now, just as a way to illustrate this, recently I reviewed In Other Words, which is a very reflective more than anecdotal memoir by the Bengali American writer Jhumpa Lahiri about how after writing 4 books in English, having basically reached the heights of, literary success, having won the Pulitzer, made the New York Times bestseller list a few times, just decides that she is no longer going to write in English. Her, mother tongue, that's not exactly right. According to her, it's her stepmother tongue, but it's basically the language that reared her. She decides that she's going to drop that and move to Rome and write in Italian, okay? Now, I think it's an impressive memoir, okay? However, there are some chapters in it that I think are mediocre. Now, we'll talk about that. But there's another book she wrote, the book after In Other Words, which she also first wrote in Italian, which was published by Knopf in 2021. I think that would be 5 years after In Other Words, which was also published by Knopf, the translated version. The book is called Whereabouts. I would say it's about a solitary woman who is happy in her solitude but has not yet found peace. This book, which is kind of structured with these vignettes as the narrator goes about her very uneventful life in what seems to be an small Italian city. It seems to me that these vignettes progressively have less and less impact as the book goes along. But if I go through and I sort of pick out chapters in it where I feel as though her prose just does not reach the connotative, between the lines power that I think is necessary to make a short, reflective novel really powerful. There's a kind of sheen of artistic, or an artistic sheen that makes transparency impossible. She talks a little bit about that in other words, how when she was writing fiction, everyone assumed it was autobiographical, but she felt a kind of protection or bubble of protection because she knew it really wasn't. Verisimilitude, which was one of her main objectives, to make something imagined seem real, okay, was a trick she pulled on the reader, but nonetheless protected her. But, for example, let's take a mediocre chapter from Mediocre. That's not the right word. A chapter that I think has oversights in it, in other words, okay? Let me describe one. It's called The Wall, about the kind of barrier that exists between her and native speakers because of her physical appearance and because of assumptions that Italians make about her. Strangers, assuming that she doesn't know the language well, assuming that, or sometimes resenting the fact that she is attempting to assimilate. Those assumptions annoy her and break her heart at times. And she talks a bit about how this is something she's always experienced. Being a Bengali American writer, very often from her appearance, there have been those Americans who have assumed that she doesn't speak English, when the fact or reality is she speaks it and masters it better than many of those who assume she doesn't know it as well as they do. And then also going back to Calcutta and meeting strangers there who assumed that because she had been born in America, she couldn't understand Bengali. So the baggage that she carries with her to Italy makes it hard for her, I think, to see objectively the kind of snap judgments that Italians make because of her physical appearance. It seems to me that the chapter lacks, in some cases, a generous perspective, like the idea of people approaching her and speaking to her in English because they assume that she doesn't know Italian. She takes that, it seems, from the tone of the piece, almost as an affront. However, perhaps if she had worked harder to see it from the perspective of shop attendants, perhaps these shop attendants were only trying to avoid an awkward moment. They were thinking probability, and rather than assuming that everyone in their country should know their language, they make the effort to reach out in the language they think is their client's native tongue, which is actually quite a generous gesture. Okay? So, in other words, when I read this chapter, even though I think perhaps it is not as well-rounded as it could be, perhaps it's not as well considered as well thought through as it could have been, the fact that it doesn't achieve all that it could have is still tremendously illuminating as far as who Jhumpa Lahiri is and what she wants to achieve. It's as though what she's communicating unconsciously is more interesting than what she tries to communicate consciously. So that this is the advantage of memoir. You can see who Jhumpa Lahiri is because the chapter isn't as good as perhaps she would have liked it to be because of the oversights in it. So yeah, I mean, who knows how long I'm going to continue reviewing memoir instead of fiction. I mean, obviously, because this is a kind of a book blog, a blog of my reading, I'm going to follow my bliss. If I feel as though I'm bored with memoir and I want to go back to fiction, I will. But nonetheless, I wanted to speak a little bit today about why I think second-rate memoir is more satisfying, or is potentially more satisfying to a reader than, let's say, second-rate fiction.